responsibility. Okay? Remember that. They may hate it, they may be angry, they may throw guilt at you, and it may be exactly what they need so that they'll stop behaving that way. Okay? Because for a person to change, the pain of change has to be less than the pain of staying the same. And if you set that boundary there, it all of a sudden becomes kind of painful to stay the same. So that may be the only way they'll change. Another thing they might do is try to retaliate. Like if you're going to set that boundary, I'm going to set this boundary. You think that's bad? Well, I'm going to do this. So they may say something like, let's just say you have, a son who smokes a lot, and you're the grandmother, and he brings the grandkids over and he just smokes in the house all the time. And you said, don't do that, and he keeps doing it. So let's say, you say, don't do that, whatever. You set a boundary. And he says, if you won't let me smoke in the house when I come over, you'll never see your grandkids again. Stuff like that happens a lot. And while you don't want to be manipulated by the other person's counter moves, sometimes you have to count the cost. Is this relationship or whatever it is that we're arguing about, is the cost of holding that boundary firm going to be too much? I'm not saying yes or no, but you have to think about those things. I want to see my grandkids. Oh, she's not going to give on this. Maybe whatever. You have to use your own wisdom here. So the next one is physical resistance. Unfortunately, sometimes people will try to set a boundary respond to a boundary with physical resistance or even violence. And if you're dealing with a person who is prone to violence, have a plan for what you're going to do if they do that. Because that's never okay. Abuse of any kind is not okay. You've got to get away from that. Another thing that might happen is blamers. They're going to act like the no that you're saying is killing them. And like we talked about a minute ago, they may try to shift the blame onto you because you just made everything ugly by your boundary. This is something that came up in counseling not long ago. This kind of thing, the blame happens a lot of times when a couple separates and there's kids involved. And in this particular case, the husband had a series of affairs and he just had another one. And so the wife was like, okay, I'm separating this time. And so, the dad was trying to take responsibility, at least on the surface, but he was telling the kids, your mom won't let us be a family anymore. He's shifting the blame for the situation onto her when he's the one, his actions caused the separation. So that's a blamer. And then we talked a minute ago when we read that little paragraph from the book, real needs. You might have to say no when somebody has a real need that you just can't meet. You might be sick, you might be out of town, you might be overloaded, you might just not be able to for whatever reason. And because there's limits to how much any one of us can do. If I were to say to, who's a small person in here, if I were to say to Marlene, can you carry that box in the back out of the room? You'd probably say, okay, I'll go do that, right? But if I said, Marlene, can you just kind of stack all these tables up and just carry them out in the hall for a second? I need the room to be empty. You'd laugh at me probably, right? Or maybe I don't know what you'd do, but you wouldn't do that. So we know we're good at knowing what our physical limits are, but we don't think about that when people come to us with their problems or with something that they need our mental and emotional help on. But how much can you carry? One person's stuff, 5 people's stuff, 10 people's stuff. We're just as much responsible for our health in that area as if I tried to carry 10 tables out in the hall and ended up breaking my back in the process. You have to use wisdom with that. Okay, so that's some external resistance. Let's look at some internal resistance, the resistance we put up ourselves. The first one is our own unmet needs, and that is pretty big, but we don't think about it. God designed us with very specific needs that are supposed to be met by the family we grow up in. Things like unconditional love, nurturing, acceptance, encouragement, trust, safety, those kind of things. But unfortunately, not all parents are able or willing to give that. So, as a result, we become adults and we have this huge painful emptiness inside that we can't quite identify. But we try to fill it. And so usually, without being aware of it, we try to get that filled by the people in our adult lives who can't meet that need because it's specific to that situation. We're often drawn to the wrong people because they somehow feel familiar. We don't know what's happening, but all of a sudden we're in that situation where they're not good for us because we grew up with this hole inside. And because this is where boundaries comes in too, because you might be in a relationship or a friendship or whatever with someone and you need to set some boundaries. They're acting out of line. But that you feel your angst rising because you think if I set a boundary, that person who's kind of meeting my surface needs might leave me. And that's too risky. So we don't set the boundary. So we have our own internal resistance that says, I'm not going to risk this person leaving me even if they're treating me poorly. Okay, and it all kind of goes back to that hole inside that God fills, but we don't know how to do that. We don't even know the hole's there. Does that make sense? A second thing is we have a fear of anger. We talked about that a minute ago, where we just don't like people being angry with us, especially those we're close to. Are you guys cold?
Yeah.
Do we need to turn the thing down?
Yes.
Up, down, whatever?
Yes.
We can jump up and down a bit.
It's only half an hour.
I'm all for that.
Turn it off.
Okay.
I don't.
I don't want you guys to rebel.
You're gonna have to ship us out of here.
If angry people can make you drop your boundaries, you probably had some angry person in your past that you still kind of carry around with you in the back of your head that influences you. So the only way to get past that is to face the angry person and not back down. If you can do that, the more you do that and learn to do it with kindness and with respect, you'll get past those feelings of wanting to back down. But practice is the only way you get past that. It doesn't just mysteriously disappear. Another fear is fear of the unknown. What will happen if I set this boundary? Will they leave me? Will life get worse? What if they leave me? I don't know. So because fear of the unknown, we sometimes say, I'm not going to set the boundary. And then we just kind of chicken out. Fear of the unknown paralyzes us so much. That's what most of our worry is about. If you're a worrier, you're generally thinking about, what if this worst case scenario happens over here? And that's all you can think about is what if that worst case scenario happens, when usually it doesn't. So you gotta not do that. The Bible is full of information and insight on worry and not to do it. So there's a really good book, this other book I brought called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. And it's an old book, but it's good. And that phrase is one that I keep in my head a lot. When I'm feeling fear or uncertainty about something, I go, okay, feel the fear and do it anyway. I have to walk through this. And so that phrase really makes a big difference for me. Because I know a lot of people think that nothing bugs me, that I can, pretty much walk through anything. And there's some things, I have some social anxiety, I have stuff going on, a lot of anxiety issues. And that phrase gets me through a lot. It's like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? That's not so bad. Okay, just don't do it. You'll get through it. The next one is blaming other people for your own unhappiness. There are some people who are pros at that. It's like whatever happens to them, there's somebody else who's at fault for it. They can't take responsibility. And all that does when you're in the habit of doing that is make you the constant victim. It's like if you never take responsibility for the things that happen in your life, and you say, well, I did this because of that, then you don't have any power to change it. If you always think it's somebody else's fault that your life is miserable. And pretty much in almost any situation, you have some control, even if the only thing you have control over is how you think about it. Yeah. So a good example of this is, I know I'm a diabetic, but I can't cut sugar out of my diet because my husband insists on having dessert after dinner. And he expects me to eat some with him. He won't eat any if I don't have any with him, so I really don't have a choice. Yeah, you do. But I've heard people say that.
Oh, yeah.
So you have a choice. You have to look at yourself honestly and take ownership. Nothing horrible is going to happen, but horrible stuff kind of happens when you don't take responsibility for your own stuff. And then the next one, too, is our own guilt feelings. We talked a minute ago about when other people throw guilt at you that doesn't belong to you. So if you're not used to setting boundaries, you're going to feel a little guilty because you're not used to it and you feel like you shouldn't do it. But you have to first realize that feeling of guilt when you're setting a boundary isn't really the truth. In general, I mean, I'm making the assumption that you guys aren't gonna go home and say, okay, my boundary is nobody can talk to me for a week. That's stupid. I'm thinking you guys are gonna be reasonable. Right? So if you said that you should feel guilty about that. But if it's like, oh man, my brother just can't speak kindly to me, he's always criticizing me and swearing at me, and you know, I don't like it, but I don't think I should be able to tell him what to say, and he has the right to say what he wants. No, not to you. So in those cases, you put a boundary. Lovingly say, if you talk to me that way, I'm going to have to say goodbye, and when you can talk to me without those words, please call me back. Stuff like that. So if you're feeling guilt that doesn't belong to you, work on that. If setting healthy boundaries was easy, you would have all done it by now and you wouldn't be here tonight, right? It's hard and it takes practice. But if you're running into resistance when you set boundaries, it means you're probably doing something right. Because people don't like to act better if they're acting poorly, usually. So we talked about all that. Now it's like, okay, how do I get people to respect my boundaries? That's kind of the big question. So let's talk about that. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road and it gets uncomfortable. Like I said before, anybody can set a boundary, but then what if someone crosses it? Well, a boundary to be effective has to have a consequence attached. We've all seen those parents who yell and threaten their kids and never do anything about the behavior, right? It's like, Johnny, stop torturing your sister. I mean it. If you do it again, I'm coming in there. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, Johnny. I'm going to, right now. You know, but they never do anything. So if there's no consequence, why change the behavior? It's working for them. So basically, there's 3 parts to a boundary and consequence. The first thing you got to do is say specifically what's the unacceptable behavior. And be as descriptive as possible. Don't just say, you have to be nicer to me. Okay? If you say something like, you got to be nicer to me, that's my boundary, he'll say or she'll say, I am being nicer. And you'll say, no, you're not being nicer. And neither one of you has any quantifiable thing to measure that with, so you're both right and wrong. Didn't get anywhere, right? So something like, I'm going to use kind of an extreme example of someone who physically abuses another person, because that's easy to tell, right? So your boundary might be, it's not okay for you to hit me ever. Pretty clear, right? Hitting, not okay, ever. So you set your boundary. Now the second part is to describe what you'll do if that boundary is crossed. What's the consequence? So, and again, be specific. So you could say something like, if you hit me again, I'll call 911 and file a domestic violence complaint. I'll leave the house, or whatever. You have to say what I will do if that happens. Okay? And then there's a third part, not always necessary, but there can be a third part too. What if they continue that behavior? What if they were okay for a while and then they continue it? Or what if they refuse to do the first thing? So an example, continuing on this, might be if you continue that behavior, describe what steps you'll do. If after all of this you still continue to abuse me, or if you won't do anger management like I asked you to do, I'm going to have to separate permanently from you because you're going to hurt me. Okay, does that make sense? You have to have a description and detail of what behavior you're not going to tolerate, and then a consequence. So here's an example. Even with little kids, you can start doing this with anybody, not just someone who's doing a severe boundary violation. But how about this? The little guy threw a block at his sister. That happens, you know, they get going. So here's what you can say. It's not okay to throw things at people, even your sister. If you throw that block at her again, I'll pack the blocks away and put them in the attic and you won't be able to play with them for a week. Clear. That's the behavior you don't like. Then you got to do it. Okay? Or how about an older kid? This was a situation in our house for a while. Who borrows your nail polish without asking and doesn't put it back? Nope, not a biggie, but still it's like frustrating. So you might say, Susie, I need to have you ask me before you borrow my nail polish every time. And I need you to put it back when you're done. And if you don't do that, you won't be able to borrow my polish again. You'll have to use your allowance to buy your own. Pretty clear. Okay? But wouldn't it be nice if you could count on them to respect that boundary? People are resistant to change, even good change. It makes you stressed. When things change, it's stressful, even if it's a good change. And even if that other person is trying hard to do what you're asking them to do and respect your boundary, they're learning a new habit and they will not be perfect. So unless it's a physical abuse or a safety issue, resist the temptation to say, oh, you didn't do it, I'm out of here, or whatever, you know. They're learning something new and you're looking for their attitude and you're looking for progression. They're not going to be perfect because you wouldn't either. Now, if your boundary is something like, don't ever try to strangle me again, they don't get a warning. Okay, so I'm talking in general. So just a few hints for setting appropriate consequences, because that's the part people struggle with sometimes. So it's very important to set consequences that you're willing to enforce. Okay, if you say, Johnny, if you throw that block at your sister again, I'm going to take him away from you for a week. Be sure you're willing to take him away from him for a week, even if that means he'll scream for the next 3 hours. Okay, there may be a consequence for you, but you got to follow through. They'll say, I can do what I want, and they do. So also, it's important to set consequences that impact that person more than you. All right, so this is a big one if you've got teenagers in the house. Let's say they stay out too late past the curfew or whatever, and you need to say, okay, honey, you can't borrow the car. You can't have the car for the next month because I'm tired of you coming in after curfew. Well, if that means that you have to drive them everywhere they need to go, that's impacting you as well. So think about it. And I'm not saying that's not a good consequence. I'm just thinking if you're ending up punishing yourself just as much, you're going to be less likely to follow through. Okay? So, and also make the consequence a natural outflow of the action. You know, if the little kid hit his sister, don't say, Johnny, you can't have any ice cream. Okay, but I'll hit my sister some more. You know, it needs to flow out of it. So let's see, if a family member is perpetually late for dinner, for example, let them go without a meal a time or two. They'll realize that you meant it. And they may whine and be hungry and try to make you feel guilty, but that was their choice, sorry. If they don't put their dirty clothes in the laundry and you've asked them to, let them go wear dirty clothes or do their own laundry. Okay, it's going to be a natural outflow of whatever the transgression was. And then another one is give immediate consequences. If there's too much time between the bad thing that happened and the consequence, it loses its impact. And the younger the person is, the more important that is. So if you got a toddler and they did something that they knew they weren't supposed to do and you wait until the next day to punish them, they lose that connection totally. And adults too, it's like, yeah, whatever. So the younger the offender, the more immediate it needs to be. And then another one that's important is use reality consequences rather than emotional ones. If you respond with anger, guilt, shame, that kind of stuff, it's not going to teach the other person an important lesson. It's going to make you the issue. If they did something horrible and you act out, you act inappropriately, you become the issue, okay? You need, to the best of your ability, use reality consequences. It's like, you did this thing, I'm not going to scream and yell at you, I'm going to do something that makes sense as an outcome of that. Like violating a curfew, a reality consequence is, sorry, you don't get to go out next weekend. And then use rewards as well as consequences. That's one we forget sometimes. And especially in marriage counseling, people come in and they talk about all the wrong things the other person did. And so a lot of the times I'll say, no, we're going to start this week. You tell me a bunch of right things that they did. Because our human nature is to notice what's out of order. You walk into a room and you don't notice that all the chairs are lined up nicely and everything's picked up in that corner. Your eye goes to what's out of order. And that's just human nature. It's not here nor there. Okay, and in a relationship, it's the same way. Our eye goes to, or our mind's eye goes to what's out of order. In a marriage, think about, in a marriage or a friendship or whatever, when you're unhappy, you're focusing on all the wrong things, when there's a lot of right things too. And so using rewards as consequences helps focus on the attempt to better behavior. Because you want to reward them for trying. And like I said a while ago, they're not going to get it right off the bat, probably, unless they're amazing. But if you meet that amazing person, would you just let me meet them? Yeah. And by reward, I don't mean, you give them a cake or a present or something, it's just notice it. Say, I really appreciate you've been trying to talk more quietly because you know that you tend to yell, or I appreciate that you've tried to, whatever, act nicer around the kids, or that you're showering once a week now, whatever it is. Notice it, because doesn't it feel good if somebody notices what you did well, and then you want to do it again? And if you're doing some good stuff, and you're not perfect yet, and all they pick on is those things that you're not perfect on, you're going to stop doing the good stuff. So you do have choices in what happens in your life. But the things that we say and the things that we think can reinforce the idea that life controls us. How many of you have ever said, I have to go to work tomorrow, I have to go to work tomorrow? We say that, don't we? Yeah. Well, you don't have to go to work tomorrow.
I get to go.
Well, not even that necessarily, but if we all say that, it's a manner of speech, I know, but if you say, I have to go to work, you're saying you have no choice, and you do. You basically choose to get up, you choose to go to work because you choose not to have the consequences of not going to work. You like to eat, that's good. But just little things like that can affect how your mindset is. It's like, am I facing the world as a victim? I have to do this, I have to do that. Or as someone who makes choices. Even if somebody comes up and has got a gun in your face and it says your money or your life, you got a choice. You may not like your choice. I choose life. What are you going to do? But you have a choice. And yeah, think about that. So there's some things in life that you don't have a choice on. Like if you get laid off, you didn't have a choice in that. Or if your car breaks down, or there's a flood or an earthquake or something like that, you didn't choose to have those things happen, but you do get to choose what you do now that they have happened, what your mindset is. You either focus on all the horrible things that have just happened, or you kind of think, okay, well, I still have this, I still can do that. And it's not like you're ignoring reality, you're not. You're just choosing to kind of lift yourself up, and those subtle changes make a huge difference in your overall, the way you feel. So, you with me so far? Okay. Well, now we're going to talk about negotiation, because you can't really just walk in and say, I think you guys watch too much TV, I'm getting rid of the TV. The family would probably say, wait a minute, we enjoy watching television, we can talk about this. So there's room for negotiation and boundary setting. Okay? They have a right to give their input to what you just said. Now, again, if it's something like, no strangling, they don't get it. Yeah. So what if the other person said, well, TV thing, how about if we just turn the TV off during the week, and then on weekends we can watch some stuff together? Why don't we try that for like a month and see if we're happier? Because I don't really want to give up the TV. And the other person might say, okay, we'll give that a try, but if I'm still unhappy, we're getting rid of the TV. I mean, I don't know. But the point is that there's room for negotiation. It's not like all of a sudden, because you got boundaries, you're Hitler, all right? In your handout, you've got a couple of extra pages we haven't gone over yet. You're probably going, oh my gosh, she's going to go on for how much longer? But I'm not going to read through those. It's how to say no, because we have trouble formulating sentences when we want to say no, right? So there's a couple of pages on different situational no's that you can say. So take a look at those on your own. And my best advice is that the more you practice doing this, the more you practice setting boundaries and respecting yourself, even on little things. Like, let's say you're trying to cut out sugar and somebody offers you cookies. Don't just be polite and say, okay, eat a bunch of cookies. You should say, no thank you, those look delicious, but I've just cut out sugar. And some people will go, oh, just have one, they're so good, one won't kill you. And you're like, okay, they're guilting me. Okay? It's okay to say, I really can't, they do look delicious. Maybe in a few months when I'm kind of easing some back in. But it's okay to tell people no. Most of us aren't going to get mad and hate you if you don't take our cookie. So it's okay. So in closing, boundaries are an important concept in being able to keep your lives in balance. You have to be able to say yes to the things you want to say yes to and no to the things you don't want to say yes to. I got confused on that sentence, but if you do that, your life is going to be much more in balance and your stress is going to go down. So think about these things and think of some areas that you could maybe start having more healthy boundaries. So tomorrow, we're going to talk about burnout. When you have been pushing yourself in too many areas too hard for too long and you are just exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I'll be using wisdom out of Matthew chapter 11 to help us deal with that. So thank you for being here. You guys are great.
Can I ask you a question?